Welcome to the Northeast Florida chapter of Sisters in Crime. And I am the president, Lana McCara, and I'm really happy to see you here today and welcome our guests in the room and our guests on Zoom. We're trying to do the new technology, so bear with us. If you have any problems on Zoom, just put it in the chat. We've got someone watching there. Thanks very much to Shelley. Next month, our guest will be Charlene Shunick, who is going to be speaking about missing persons. She belongs to a nonprofit missing persons organization. She's going to talk about what really happens if you have a missing person in your family, what you can expect the police to do, what they don't do, and then tell some stories about missing people that they have found. It's going to be a really good session, and that's going to be presented via Zoom. She is in Louisiana, and she's going to be coming in by Zoom to speak to us. On March 5th, which is Tuesday at 8 p.m., I'm going to be presenting to the Treasure Coast chapter of Sisters in Crime on their Zoom on Your Deepest, Darkest Secrets Are the Key to Your Next Bestseller. So if you want to join the Zoom meeting on 8 p.m. on Tuesday, just watch the chat. Shelley's going to put the link in the chat in a minute. And if you're in the room and you want to go, let Shelley know. And Shelley, if you don't mind raising your hand, so she can get the link to you. You have to register, but it's totally free and open for guests to come. On March 16th, I'm going to be in St. Augustine, not far from here. I'm going to be speaking at the Antique City chapter of the Florida Writers Association in the main library. So if you want to come over there, March 16th at 10 a.m., I'm going to also be speaking about Your Deepest, Darkest Secrets at that one too. March 22nd, the Venice Book Fair is in Venice, Florida. Just to let you know, there's that event going on if you want to attend. And also, we have instituted something new here at this chapter. The benefits of being a paid member. There are certain perks you get when you're a paid member of this chapter, and we honor other chapter members too. You don't have to be a member of this particular chapter, but a chapter of Sisters in Crime. And by the way, you have to be a member of the national organization in order to be a member of the chapter. We have some special things that we're doing. We have a private newsletter for paid members only, and that goes out once a month. It offers you the opportunity, if our chapter has a booth at an event, that you can join our booth and at no charge. So we'll let you know when that happens, when we have a booth available. We allow chapter members to watch by Zoom. And so if you are a member, you're going to get that link in an email, in the monthly email, of how to attend via Zoom. Sometimes we get speaking opportunities, and we'll put that out in the newsletter, as well as conference events, contests. And we are holding a one-day workshop in October. It's on dual timelines, how to write dual timelines. We're hiring a speaker for that. It's going to be a big deal. It's going to be a full day. We're going to have a lot of activities. And if you are a chapter member, you get a discount on the day. And there are going to be table opportunities and all kinds of things. We're so excited to have that coming up October. We don't have a date yet or a venue. We're working on that now. So stay tuned. But if you're a member, you get a discounted ticket to come.
It's the first Saturday in October, October 5th.
October 5th? Okay.
Speaker's Denny Bryce and
Denny Bright.
Bryce. Yeah, Bryce.
Bryce, B-R-I-C-E, Bryce.
And she's going to be talking about the dual timelines, and so we're calling it Double Vision.
Double Vision. I love it.
San Marco. Two locations. We're narrowing down.
San Marco. Okay. Well, we're farther along than I remember. That's really awesome. Shelley is taking that. She's taking the lead on that one. I'm so grateful for that. Okay, so I think that's it. We're ready, and we have our guest today, Terry Shepard. He is the publisher, and I want you to talk about yourself when you come up, introduce yourself a little bit, and let us know. So come on up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody.
Here you go.
Thank you very much. You don't have to take notes because everything that you will see today is going to be in a PDF, which I will supply to the chapter. And the challenge when you are limited in time is that you can't get it all in. And so there are a lot of examples and links to videos that have been very helpful to me in learning how to write diverse characters. There are examples of authors that do it very well. I brought a few. If we have time, I'll read a couple of selections to you from authors that have inspired me. But you don't need to worry about anything because it'll all be there. And the other thing that I always do is I bring my little MP3 microphone with me so that I can record and then listen to what I've told you. And what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll fix all my mistakes and I'll put the audio recording up for members only of the chapter as well. So if you are on Zoom and are watching as a guest, I highly encourage you to join the Sisters in Crime family and the Northeast Florida chapter. It is one of, I think, 8 chapters that I currently am a member of across the country. And I have learned so much being a sibling for the Sisters in Crime. So thank you for having me today. My story is very much a diverse story because I did not start out to become a writer. I am probably, as you look at me now, you probably are making visual judgments about what kind of guy I am. I'm a white guy. I'm wearing the typical writer's outfit of blue jeans and casual coat and warm semi-March flannel. And there are a lot of things that says, right? And if you're a writer and you're writing about me, is that better? Okay. If you're writing about me, you're going to make some judgments based upon what you see. But that doesn't necessarily describe the person inside. And that is one of the secrets of writing diverse characters, is that just because they happen to look a certain way does not mean that that's who they are inside. And that, for me, is the essence and the excitement of mysteries and thrillers like the Jessica Ramirez series that I write, because you discover over the course of the character arc some secrets about these individuals that you didn't know about. One of the other things that I did, especially with my first book, Chasing Vega, is that I translated it into Spanish, but I did not do the translation. Emma Gomez, who is an authentic Latina and one of my story consultants, wrote that book. And what I told her to do was stick to the wireframes, the very loose plot, the key things about the plot and the story, but make the story accessible to that audience. And what she told me when she read this book was, if I were reading this in Spanish, I would want to know a lot more about Jessica's family dynamic. Because by the nature of a thriller writing thing, you have to keep the story going. It has to go really fast. You have to introduce your characters, and at the end of each chapter, you got to scare them. So you're going to want to turn the page. So I turned that over to her, and the book that she wrote is very different, but I hope is more accessible to the audience. So that we'll talk about a little bit later in the PowerPoint about how to do that. This is the other project that I'm very proud of, and I have brought one of these for every one of you today to take home with you. At the beginning of the coronavirus adventure, my 2 grandchildren were very afraid, and they came to me and they said, "Grandpa, can you explain how scared we should be about this?" So what Colleen, my wife, and I did was that we contacted the Centers for Disease Control, and we talked with Dr. Fauci and said, if we were going to write a book about mystery bugs, how could we teach people about things like social distancing, why we mask, how to wash your hands properly, and vaccine science for a new kind of vaccine that is based on a whole new pharmacology that hasn't been done before. And that's what we did, was we wrote the Mystery Bug series. It started out as 1 book. It ended up being 3. We combined them all together. And I wrote it. This is another thing about the diversity of characters. I was thinking about my audience. And I knew that there would be 2 audiences for this book. There would be the kids who would hear it and the parents who would read it. And what do we remember most about growing up and reading children's books? Probably Dr. Seuss. So I wrote this in the same poetic style as Dr. Seuss, tetramic pentameter. So as you read Juliet and the Mystery Bug, it will feel like Dr. Seuss has come back alive to you as you're learning about all this stuff. And as you notice, I was very sensitive about inclusiveness in the story. And this goes beyond the intention that I think we all have to try and write books that properly and effectively show people in their best lights. This was a business decision because I knew that the more people I could include in my stories, the bigger the audience would be. So in Mystery Bug, you'll notice that the accomplished scientists all have complexions that 20, 30 years ago, you might not associate with that kind of activity. And it was great fun to write it. My son-in-law, who is a recovering attorney, did all the graphics. And my test audience was my two grandkids, at the time aged 9 and 3, I think. And Juliet is my granddaughter, who also happens to have Down syndrome. She came to us with Down syndrome. She is an absolute delight. So this book is just a cornucopia of diversity, and I'm going to send one home with all of you. It may not be your cup of tea, but maybe you know a grandchild or somebody else that does. So there are some things, and this is a long PowerPoint. I'm going to blow through a lot of this stuff, but remember that you'll get the link, which will have in the PDF, there will be links to everything I talk about here and to additional resources where you can learn more about how I learned to write diverse characters. We all probably know some of this stuff, right? Agency and specificity are the two real keys to writing great characters. When I interview people, which is part of what I do, I have a podcast called Terry Shepard in Conversation. TerryShepardInConversation.com is the website. I have done probably over 100 author interviews. And one of the first questions I ask is, which is more important, plot or characters? And to a person, they all say characters. And as we talk about them, those are some of the powerful things that are important to that. And it's more than a list of traits, right? It's the why. And when we all started writing, there was a why. I was loving hearing some of you talk about, especially you, because you have a story that needs to come out and needs to be published, and you're still getting over your fear of doing that. I hope this group will encourage you to go ahead and have that story come out because it needs to be heard. And that is what I love most about the research that I did, because part of it was reading a lot of really amazing authors and some people that I had not known before. And I targeted them in my podcast interviews, because the whole reason I started the podcast was I wanted to have a reason. I wanted to have a reason for people to say yes to me. And so if I was going to promote your book and I'd say, hey, how'd you like to come be on my show and talk about these topics that are important to you, or talk about the book you're going to publish, I'll be able to help you. But I also get you for that 10 minutes, sometimes a half an hour after the show when we start talking shop. And that's how I learned to write. Because my character background is a whole lot different. I am filled with flaws and imperfections. For many years, I was a corporate guy. And I first came to Jacksonville in 1992 to run what was then Continental Cablevision. It was the largest cable operation in the Continental Constellation. And I was lucky enough to be your head servant for 8 years. And even after the company was sold, I loved Jacksonville so much that I stayed here to start my own business as an entrepreneur. I had an overseas radio network. I had a .com that helped invent the weather alerts that you now get on your phones. I had a record company that I started to help starving artists make their CDs back when we had CDs. And because I had too much money, I decided I loved to fly airplanes. So I decided to start an airplane company, which would rent airplanes to various flight schools so I could fly really well-maintained airplanes. I did that right before 9/11. And that's a great way in the space of about 48 hours to lose $1 million. It was really, really fun. So that was what my life was like beforehand. And I did that across the country and around the world. But when we decided finally to come back to Jacksonville, because this is where our family is, I needed something to do. And I was feeling like maybe some of you feel that my life as a useful person was over because I could no longer do the things that I'd love to do in the corporate world. And one of those things, because of my background and my parents and the people they exposed me to, was I was determined to break open the doors, crack the glass ceiling for women, minorities, and the disabled. When I became that white guy with power and authority, that was my mission. I come from a family of teachers and preachers, and we do things because it's right, not necessarily because it's popular or gives us more power or money. And that was my thing. And it was the best thing about being in the corporate world is to see a couple of generations actually of people that are still in touch with Colleen and me that we were able to help, whether it was guiding them to the right kind of counseling so they could get out of an abusive marriage, or putting them in a non-traditional role as a woman running a department that sold cable to, we called multiple dwelling units. Back then it was, the apartment complexes and businesses, not traditionally done. Most of the sales guys back then were guys. We loved doing that. That was the best thing about it. And I no longer could do that when I came back down here, retired. So my shrink said, why not take a look at writing? You can do this. Create your own fictional metaverse where you can put these same people in positions of power, adventure, and authority. And what I hope when I write my books about Jessica and her very diverse cast of characters is that they will inspire the real people who live in those bodies, who look and live like them, who maybe can identify with one or two of their motivations, conflicts, and flaws to want to grow up to be those kind of heroes. These are just a couple of examples of what the examples of modern female protagonists look like. I have many more in the PDF. Remember, the best thing about us is our flaws. And if you think about the detectives that even Sherlock Holmes was a drug addict, that is part of the story. And I think it's part of what draws us as an audience to our books, because we can relate to that. And we love how they can overcome them. Even in the cozy genre, it's harder to do because you have more rules, but the motivations and potential conflicts are where it's all about. The why between the what, right? Actions and nuance. The driving force. What are the things that may help you in your life make the choices that you've made? You imbue your characters that you write with those same things. Noble, selfish, complex motivations can be good or bad. They're all very nuanced, and some of the best writers nuance those things so well. They can bring that to you in the dialogue between their characters. They can bring that to you in one paragraph of exposition. And I love and hate reading some of those people. When I read Megan Abbott, for example, she is such a wonderful writer. I know I can never achieve that level. And on one hand, I want to quit because I can't do it. But on the other hand, she's a Michigan girl, just like I'm a Michigan boy, and we're friends. I am inspired by her because she writes so well, and she encourages me to up my game. I'm letting you look at this stuff as I fly through some of these. Again, they will all be in the PDF for you, so you can take a deeper dive into it. Motivation, flaws, and growth potential, right? I mean, the best stories and characters, no matter who you create, all have these things going for them. We're very interested in the character arc, how they grow. We're interested in why they do what they do. Jessica, for example, is very driven by a strict moral code that she has, and she makes some bad decisions because of that. And one of her flaws is that she's got a really short fuse when she thinks she's right, and she's not always right. So now we come to the fun part, the research. How does a white guy learn to be somebody else? And I have a lot of resources and links for you in the PDF on this, because it would take up 10 slides for me to show you I have examples of books that I recommend that show this very well. I have a whole playlist for you of YouTube videos that taught me a lot about how to write diverse characters. And that's where this comes from. Reading books by the authors who actually are doing it well with diverse background. Anything that you can find on one of the interesting things that I subscribe to is Masterclass. And there's some Judy Bloom's whole thing that she teaches on Masterclass is fascinating. Walt Mosley is another one who's on Masterclass and talks about how he writes. Listening to their voices and they're telling their backstories can teach you an awful lot about how to do it. And then respectfully engaging with people who are living those lives. Jessica is based on Tracy Ruiz, who is a honest to goodness 25-year Latina cop at a real police agency who is recently retired. And when she started, she was in the middle of a patriarchy. She was the only one. She had a very rough career. One of the reasons I decided to write Jessica was because as we talked, she told me these tales which had unhappy endings. And I said, well, wait a minute, what if I could rewrite some of those where you win? What would that feel like? And it was very therapeutic for her to see that happen. And it was very fascinating for me to hear her talk, to go and spend time with her family and immerse myself in her life. I've probably ridden over the course of my lifetime with dozens of police officers. In one of my previous lives, I worked for a university as an alumni guy, and I had a whole part of the university that was dedicated to police administration. So I met very many cops, and because they were fun people, I got to go do some of their training with them. And I tried to find the women that were still working, and I would go and ride. I just ride along, watch them do their thing. And I learned some very fascinating assumptions that were proven to me. And that is that in many cases, in conflict situations, women are better than men at being cops because they de-escalate. We guys, because of the testosterone in many of our bodies, this is not universal, but there's enough of that out there that I can make this generalization. We go into fight mode very, very, very quickly. Tracy is short. She's very strong. She's lived through a traffic accident that almost killed her. She had to learn to walk again. She had to learn to talk again. And she went back into the police force after doing all that stuff. But when I ride with her, the biggest questions she asks is, how can I help you? And that is one of the ultimate de-escalators. It's so much fun to watch her do that. The individual experiences that they have is fascinating. And as I talk to other authors, I love to ask them, especially if they write characters that are different than they are. You know, when people ask me, how is you as a white guy can write about me because I don't look like you, I say, hey, listen, we all write about killers. Most of us have some serial killers or some really bad people in our books. Most of us are not bad people. So we have to learn what's going on inside their heads, what their motivations are, what their strengths are, what their flaws are. My favorite kind of villain in Chasing Vega, that's the villain I created, is a very bad woman who's doing bad things for the right reasons. I love those kind of characters. And that gives you, even a bad person is worth some empathy and worth some love. The other thing to think about is the difference between respectful representation versus harmful stereotyping. And I have some examples here. This is just we have very little time. This could be a full day course I could teach you at some point in time. But the understanding of them and putting them in situations that would be contrary to negative stereotyping. And there's some great examples that we could go through if we were doing some exercises here. Portraying them as the rich, full human beings that they are, and not necessarily the caricatures that we would see on a television show, a situation comedy, where we tend to throw those people into the old school stereotypes. Push back against common tropes, right? I love the fact that in the very first Star Trek pilot, the Spock character was a woman. The number one person behind the captain was female. Captain Janeway in the later Star Trek series brilliantly played by the actress against the stereotype. Those kind of things to think about. And then the nuances. When you watch, I love watching TCM. I recommend Turner Classic Movies. It's a great place, especially to see a great actress like Olivia de Havilland speaking with her eyes about what's going on. And these are traditional roles, but as a writer, what I would challenge you to do is to imagine putting a character, a diverse character, into that situation, into that body. How would they make that happen? And avoid the harmful stereotyping, right? It's out there. It's still there. And we all come programmed. The older we are, it's harder to do. We are men and women of our times. I picked a scene I was going to read to you from Raymond Chandler, and he's definitely a man of his times. He writes very well, and some of his most fascinating characters are the female characters in his stories. But you will see stereotypical names, labels, descriptions associated with that. And you want to try and avoid that flatness. And also throwing in the one character, right? In my stories, they are all diverse. Chasing Vega, Jessica, the star, Latina cop, a swimming sensation whose father would not let her go to the Olympics, even when the life role model for her, who also happened to be a Latina swimmer, invited her to try out. He wouldn't let her do that. She became a cop just to make him mad. Her sidekick, Alexandra Clark, who originally in the first draft was a much stronger character than Jessica, is a computer forensics genius who happens to be a lesbian. And she's fearless. She does not put up with any garbage from the chief or anybody in the chain of command. And she's a lot of fun because the two of them together encourage each other to step outside, to draw outside the lines, and to follow their moral compasses, which leads to trouble. And then fundamentally different, strategic or strange from a presumed default, usually white heterosexual gender. It's okay to let your stars be themselves, whatever they happen to be. And some of that has to do with their background. One of my favorite interviews, and it's an interview that I'll put into a link that I'll put into the stuff that I share with you, was with a woman named Betty Kearse. And she wrote a book called The Other Madisons. Betty Kearse comes from a line descended from an enslaved person who was a lover of President James Madison. And the thing that I learned from Betty is that there is a history in African culture where they identify a person in the tribe who becomes the oracle. This is before writing, before the internet. And that oracle spends their entire life hearing the history of the tribe. They learn it verbatim, and they become the one to pass it on. And for Betty, there came a time, she's a geneticist, by the way, a physician who's a geneticist, a fascinating woman. I just love her. And when the time came, her mother brought a shoebox to her and she said, "You are now the family oracle." And the book, The Other Madisons, was the result. So remember, intention versus impact. One of the things that I think about all the time, and I'm sure I fail at this, is that my intention is always to show people, even my villains, in the best possible light, for us to understand what it is that motivates them to do what they do. And I can't always do it. You know, there's sometimes that I don't get stuff right. It was fascinating to me that the first piece of advice I got as I circulated my story to my Latina cop friends was that they told me, Glock pistols do not have safeties. That was their first piece of feedback to me. It wasn't about how they drew their characters. The other thing is that some people, if you've done your research right and you portray them well, will be uncomfortable with the authenticity. Colleen and I have many, many wonderful lesbian wife and wife combinations that we love. And an affirmation for me that I got it right was when my friend Cindy wrote to me and said, "Have you been spying on us without our knowledge?" Because you drew me perfectly. And it wasn't perfect, you know, but that if we've written the books right, somebody's going to look at a one dimension of our character and say, yeah, I can relate to that. And also, ultimately, it's the audience perception, right? Our ultimate goal is to make our stories saleable so that people can and will want to buy them. And that's where you have to think about, okay, how is the audience going to perceive everything from how I describe the locations, the kind of vehicles, the chase scenes, the gunplay, the love scenes? How do I describe them in a way that's going to make people want to buy the book, want to read it, and want to read the next one? So here are the takeaways. I've run through these slides very quick. I'll give you lots of time. Authenticity is a process, not a single step. We are always growing human beings. We are always evolving, and there are always opportunities for us to learn. I'm so grateful that I stopped being a corporate guy, because now I have all of these friends in Sisters in Crime and at the conferences that I've been to that I never would have met unless I found the courage to become a writer. Actively seek critiques. I love it. One of my favorite phrases is feedback is the breakfast of champions, right? So I want to hear from people about what I got right and what I got wrong in the books. Back when I was a corporate guy, I always thanked people who said, I love your service, but I learned from the people who said, this is where you're getting it wrong. And then to have the courage to step outside your comfort zone, write that book, get it published, even if it's imperfect, because every book is going to be better than the last one. The biggest fear we all have, everybody in this room and everybody on the Zoom, is that this is the last book we're going to write because everybody's going to hate it. We'll be run out of town. That's not the case. You just have to keep writing. So that's it in a nutshell. This is the link, terryshepard.com/NFSINC, and that's where the PDF will be. Based upon your questions in our conversation today, I'll add more things to fill in the blanks for any of the questions you may have. So with that, let me turn it over to you. Tell me what you want to know. How can I tell you more?
You mentioned master class.
Yes.
How much you learned. I don't know. I've not heard of that. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's not. Yes, sure. The question is, tell us more about masterclass. Masterclass.com is a fascinating way to immerse yourself in a variety of topics. Jane Goodall is on there. Ron Howard is on there teaching, directing. Jodie Foster's there. There are a number of writers. James Patterson's there. That's how I met Dan Brown. Dan Brown was on Masterclass. He was just starting. And when I started writing, I picked 4 of the authors that I thought were my heroes at the time. And I wrote them fan letters saying, hey, I'm 65. I'm starting this new thing. Could you give me one piece of advice? And to a person, they did so much more than that. Megan Abbott was one of them, Allison Leota, Dan Brown, and James Patterson. That was with 4 people. But Masterclass is a good way if you don't have a whole lot of experience. Masterclass presents the concept of what they do in a way that is that will give you a good grounding in it. It's not necessarily as good as going to a seminar where an expert's speaking directly to you about the topic. But it's a little pricey, but it's what you will find if you buy it, you buy it for a year, is that there will be other things besides writing in Masterclass that will interest you.
Okay.
What else can I tell you? Yes.
I'm very curious about your publishing company. Tell us about what you do.
Okay. Ramirez and Clark Publishers.com. Ramirez and Clark are Jessica Ramirez and Alexandra Clark, my 2 protagonists. Originally, we started the company as something that could own my copyrights, because coming from the business world and having a sister who was a publicist for a top 5 publishing firm, I knew an awful lot about what goes on. When we're authors, the first thing that we think about is, how can we get a big publishing contract? But the more authors that I talk about who live in that world, unless you are a James Patterson, they don't have the money anymore to support you. And I struggled with the idea of begging an agent to take 15% of my money to tell me that I should write something different because a white guy shouldn't be writing a Latina, that I should be writing 20-somethings that could be a Netflix series, that kind of stuff. That was counter to my experience. So we started Ramirez and Clark to handle my independent publishing of my books. And I made every mistake. I learned all about Amazon KDP, about Ingram Spark, about Lulu, about BookBaby. I learned about story consultants and editors and cover designers and all that stuff. So what happened along the way is my friends started asking me, how do I format my manuscript for publication? Or what does a story consultant do? Or how do I find a really good cover designer who will create a cover that fits my story? And I had made friends in all these spaces along the way. So in the beginning, I said, well, I'm glad to help you. I got the software. Send me your Word document. I'll format it for you. But finally, my wife and my business manager said, you need to start charging for this stuff. So Ramirez and Clark has evolved from just solely owning my copyrights to a services organization. We're not a traditional publisher in that we don't sign contracts with people and we don't pay royalties. But what we do, they're allowed to use our indicia and our brand if they want to. They don't have to. But what we do is we help them to get their books published wherever they want them to be published. And that's become a pretty big job. I mean, another thing that I do is I do book narrations. I'm now the voice of Patrick Flint, Pamela Fagan Hutchins' great detective. And I'm on the second book for her. I'm on my 20th book narration. And the way I got started in that was that the narration is my final edit. After it's been through everything, the last thing I do is I read the book aloud to my wife. And that's where I find all the little stuff that I've missed. But also because part of my background is that I was a broadcaster and have been doing radio and movie trailers and commercials and things for over 50 years, is that I understood a little bit about the nuances of voice acting. And that also is what happens in my head as I'm writing. Do your characters ever talk to you as you're driving down the street? Do they tell you things and take the story in directions you never thought it would? That's a good thing. You're not crazy. You're just an author. So that's Ramirez and Clark. Yes, ma'am.
What is a story consultant?
That was one of the greatest gifts I got. You know, one of the things I do at conferences, I try and find the tables where people are by themselves or alone, you know, and I'll sit down and I'll ask them, what's the coolest thing that's happened to you since you started writing? And I ran into this woman named Mary Lederman Sutton, who writes under a different pen name. And she said, story consultant Dawn Alexander. And I said, well, tell me more about that. What does a story consultant do? They look at your book and they tear it apart. They are not developmental editors. They look at the overall story. They look at the characters that you've built, and they go into a deep dive with you about that. And that is exactly what I needed when I was writing Vega, because I'd never written fiction before. I have half a dozen nonfiction books out under another name, but I'd never written fiction. And Dawn taught me most of the basics about how to write fiction, about things like point of view. She was the one that pointed out to me that Allie was a stronger character than Jess. And so I had to go back and rewrite and make Jess a little bit stronger so that they could have a better relationship dynamic. And I really wanted Jess to be the star of the show. So that's what a story consultant does. My process is that I'll write the first draft, and then it goes to Dawn. Then it goes to a developmental editor that I have. Then it goes out to the beta readers. And my, the folks, depending upon the type of characters I have in there, I try and find people who live in those bodies to read and tell me if I got them right, wrong. I'll fix that stuff. Then it goes to the last, the copy editor, proofreader. Then I print it. So.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Yes, ma'am.
How do you handle accents and, individual lingo of the various diverse characters?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that unless you're a Mark Twain and really do that, I try to avoid too much of that. And even in my narration, I learned this from Tom Hanks. If you have not heard his read of Anne Patchett's The Dutch House, Anne Patchett gets great narrators. Hanks did The Dutch House, and her latest one, it's Meryl Streep did that. Two of the greatest actors of our time. And Hanks does not change a thing. He brings his voice up a little tiny bit for the women, and Maybe we'll change the timbre just a little bit if it's an accent, but I can't do them. I mean, I can do a Scottish accent. So in the second book, I actually made one of the characters in Great Britain a Scottish cop because that's the only thing I could do. I couldn't do a British accent. And that was a fun dimension, was that when I was creating Jess, I created a Twitter handle for her. And I was very clear that she was a fictional detective, but I put her out there and she started responding to police agencies, great job, 9 o'clock check-in. She was using the language, and she developed a fan base in Great Britain of cops. She got 2 marriage proposals from cops over there. And the feedback was, you have to bring her here. She's got to come here. So the whole second act of the Chasing the Captain, my second Jessica Ramirez book, takes place in London because they demanded it. And so when it came time for me to actually have the first draft done, I reached out to a PC with the Metropolitan Police in London. And I said, take a look at this. Tell me what I got right. Tell me what I got wrong. Because there is a partnership to London cops that play a very big role in the storyline of Chasing the Captain. And one of those cops becomes Alexandra's love interest. And not to give too much away in the next Jessica book, but they get married in Scotland. And that marriage scene is one of the most fun scenes I've ever written. Because if you can imagine 2 women dressed in kilts going right in the face of the male patriarchy in Scotland, and Jessica and her cast all there. That was a lot of fun to write. The other thing that I thought that has been really gratifying for me is the email I've received from people who never thought that they could maybe do some of this stuff. In Chasing Vega, Jessica's banished. She gets right out of the chute. She gets suspended for 30 days. So she goes out to visit her uncle, who's the sheriff in Coconino County, Arizona, dealing with a combination of a serial killer and a hacker. And their medical examiner there is a fellow by the name of Joey Price, who is on the autism spectrum. And I'm very lucky because my best friend's son is on that spectrum, and I've known him since he was a baby. And so I have a little bit better understanding about some of that stuff and what's locked inside that beautiful mind that the rest of the world can't necessarily see because they're judging based upon discomfort with social interaction. And the emails that make me the happiest are when I hear from people who are on the spectrum and say, I never thought I could become a doctor. And I tell them, hey, look, most of the doctors I know are on the spectrum already. That's part of what makes them so brilliant. But that's the fun part and why I encourage you to write diverse characters, because there are things that they can do that most people wouldn't expect they could do. And it's our job as storytellers to open that door so that the rest of the world can see how important each of us are as individuals. The biggest takeaway for me as an author of diverse characters is that I have developed a much deeper empathy for the human condition and for everybody I see. Everyone I meet, I wonder what those layers are of the onion that I could possibly not know about. There's the old saying that we all carry burdens that nobody sees. Now, when I look at somebody, I almost feel that paranormal sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, and we're all in it together. So if I leave you with nothing else today about the stories you write, imbue them with characters that aren't like you. Learn how to write them in a way that is authentic, and it will help you grow in your relationships too.
Real quick, what was the name of the Ann Padgett book?
Yes, Tom Hanks narrated The Dutch House. It's not even a genre I enjoy, but I was thinking about becoming a narrator, and I love Tom Hanks. So I checked it out at my Jacksonville library, and I put it on, and it had me. I mean, I was cleaning the house for an entire weekend just so I could listen to that story.
The other thing, you got another typo right behind you.
Oh, I'm sure.
You misspelled your name.
Did I? Good. Okay. Yeah, look at that. You know why? because I copied that slide from the beginning. I will definitely fix it.
wanted to point that out before, but-
Yeah. When I put these things together, I never know what the audience is going to be like. And I never know whether you're going to want a didactic kind of classroom experience, or whether you want the highlights, or whether you want me to read to you, or what you want. So I just throw these things together. I make sure that I create a PDF that has a whole bunch of more information, because mostly what people want is, how did you learn it? Where did you learn it? So all that stuff's there. But
I'm looking forward to digging into some of the references.
yeah. And the other thing that you guys can do for me is that if you have additional resources that you found, please share them with me and I'll add them, because I'm constantly, I realize I still have a lot to learn. This is a constant learning process. That's part of the fun.
Excellent.
Was this helpful to you today?
Very much.
Good, good. Thank you so much for having me.
This is just a little.
Oh,
Uh,
I just spelled my name right too. I can't even do it, but you said thank you so much. I have books for all of you.
Oh, wow, okay. Wow, that was great. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you for the people who are on Zoom. And we'll be sending out the link, the recording to everyone. So in case someone missed it. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. It's the E, shepherd with two E's. Two E's, okay.
The bottom one's fine. Correct.
Oh, you don't.